the writer who knows exactly what he's doing doesn't know very much. Because you don't know. That's what I've discovered, that you really don't know what you're doing. And that's great. I can remember being in awe of how does anybody ever write a novel? I mean, I could write a short story, but a novel, how do you write a novel? My God, I mean, it's 300 pages. I started, this is a collection that's accumulated from all the books, genealogies and maps and family charts and a lot of notes mixed in here, but you know, like basically here's a map of North Albany, but I had to keep, in order to keep it straight, I had to draw myself a map to remember where everything was in order to keep the logistics of every situation in mind. And here's the map of Colony Street, where the Phelans lived, and then here was the Phelan house, which my old family, they lived there. And then I had just populated the street with all the people I knew who were around there and who were part of the family's relationships, and some of them did live there. And an amazing number of things of great substance happened on this street, and once I decided to use it. Who was it? Tom Flanagan, wonderful guy. He wrote a great review of Roscoe, and he took my whole work into consideration and for the New York Review of Books. And he said, you know, Kennedy may know more about Albany than Joyce knew about Dublin. And I wouldn't be surprised, because I had an upper hand on Joyce because I lived here, and Joyce was in Paris. He had to keep sending people back letters, say, well, what was on the corner of so and so. I could go down to the library and look up what was on the corner, and then go to the corner and figure it out. This is a new book, Shango. It took me almost 9 years to write this book, in order to understand Cuban history and civil rights history, and in order to understand what I had been through and understand myself. People say, you always write about Albany. How are you going to do Cuba? And I said, well, I'll have a guy from Albany who goes down to Havana, write about that. And that's exactly what I did. The book opens with Danny Quinn going over to the Floridita bar to see if he can meet Hemingway. He's just quit his job in Miami and come down to sort of freelance, get a job somehow, and write a novel, and maybe write a nonfiction book the way his grandfather did. His grandfather, Daniel Quinn of Quinn's book. This is the final cover. This is the one I picked. And it has this jazzy slant to it, and I of course I loved both of these covers. I loved them all of this face. This is gorgeous woman, and the palm tree touch was, you know, just adds Cuba to it, and that was what made the difference. And so there it is. That's the cover of the book. He pulls his white silk handkerchief out of his lapel pocket, and he coughs into it, and everybody is standing, applauding, sending up screeches, cheers, hoots of joy, and other eruptions that are rejoicings of what they can't utter, salutes to the ineffable. Cody gets it, and he plunges his hand into his coat pocket, gripping the handkerchief. Quinn glimpses blood on it. Cody holds onto the piano, smiles at everybody, shakes his head to tell them it's too much. He can't stand it. But on and on goes the applause, and Cody still has that smile. He can't get rid of that smile. He always wears a smile. That's why they call him Shine. It's something I decided very early on that I wanted to do. I decided before I even knew I wanted to do it. Well, I decided probably in high school. I remember reading Our Town when I was a sophomore in high school, and I was so knocked over by it. And I just wanted to read. I wanted to write like that. And so something coalesced in me that it made me want this, and I really don't understand it. I thought all I ever wanted to do was be a journalist, a newspaperman, and write some fiction on the side. And you do it with your left hand, keep a typewriter. I remember when I was in college, I was writing a short story, and I was also writing a news story that was due in 5-10 minutes, and this was due in an hour. And for the magazine, it was going to press, and I was finishing the short story. But yet I was constantly reading, and the closer I got to graduation, the better stuff I was reading. I began to discover Hemingway's short stories, and he knocked me over with those short stories, and I just went back to them over and over and over again. And I wanted to write those. And when I was writing early on, I kept thinking, how am I going to get a style? What the hell? What is a style? What is a style? And the more I thought about it, the stupider it is to try and create a style. You have to go down inside yourself and dredge it out, find out what's happening in your imagination with this material that you're supposedly so interested in. What does it mean? And when you're writing about an individual, what are you saying about this individual that isn't obvious and or cliched? You have to bring something that's new, and you have to invest your own imagination into this unknown material, which is down there fermenting all the time, changing as it moves. And when I started to write Ironweed, I went inside of Gerald's head, and I started to write the best language that was at my disposal at that time. And I began to hear language that I had never used before. And it just came out of that particular moment when I was able to put these two people into juxtapositioning that allowed me to listen to their conversation.
So you want to be buried under a stone like that?
I never knew no bum buried under a gravestone.
More than once, I heard, who the hell wants to read a novel about bums, especially bums in Albany? And I met an editor, and he was a hot editor. He had Joyce Carol Oates and John Irving, Doris Grumback, critic and novelist. I met him at a cocktail party, and he said, I'd love to see your book. And he wrote me a letter, and he said, I'm looking forward to adding you to our list. And I sent him the manuscript. And 2 days after I sent it, I opened up the New York Times, and he had just dropped dead in the subway. So the person who inherited the manuscript felt like, bums in Albany? No. So that was where the odyssey began, and I went back to another old editor of mine from Coward McCann. She liked Ironweed, and although she thought it had too many bums. But then she got fired. So the fickle finger of fate was pointing directly at me in those days. And I went around then. That's when the 13 rejections came, including another round at Viking. So I got an invitation from Esquire to go write a piece on an interview with Bellow, who had a new book coming out, The Dean's December. And Saul and I had maintained a friendship, and he read Billy Phelan, and he was very taken with it. And he just he said, I'm amazed that they're not publishing the next book after this book. And then he hadn't read Ironweed, he didn't know, but I had a copy of it sent to him, and then he read that, and then he wrote me a letter. And these Albany novels will be memorable, a distinguished group of books. That's what he said in that letter. And they used that quote. So anyway, there you go. I don't think the kind of learning that you need for a new work carries over. I think if you're trying to do something new, that you have to reinvent the wheel. Once you make a commitment somehow after a time of judgment and you put it on the page, then things begin to take a shape that has meaning for you. The sound of the voices, the angle of vision through which you approach history is everything. Who is going to be able to tell this story most cogently? And who will have privileged action to get into the center of the story that you're writing? All these things have to come because you're inventing everything. You're inventing the story. You don't know where the action is at the beginning. You don't know anything. You start from nothing. And so I don't think that anybody really, if you're going to write a carbon copy of what you wrote last year, you don't have a problem. But that's not what most serious writers are doing. You invent everything from scratch. It's always a new horse race.
I got my PhD before my high school diploma, which made me at least a little unique around certain neighborhoods. So, but you get old and you last a long time. You end up getting a lot of pieces of paper. The wall is never big enough, in lieu of money, by the way. If you're working on a newspaper, you learn to publish your first draft. You usually don't have 3 days or 4 days to bring it to full polish. You get a call, go out to so-and-so, come back in and write it, and it's in the paper the next day. But you also know, the longer you do it, that there's stories involved in even the ones that you're working on where the truth is still elusive. And I think that's why so many newspapermen become novelists too. Whether it's Hemingway or Stephen Crane or Dickens and other people, they know first people lie. You can ask them something and they tell you something and it makes absolute sense and maybe moves you to some extent, but it could be all a lie of some kind. The interior lives of people are beyond the knowledge of even the very best newspaperman, and should be, by the way. You can't sit there and decide that what he's thinking at a certain point is X, Y, or Z. You don't know. You never will. But the novelist can at least make a plausible attempt to get inside the minds of the subjects he's writing or she's writing about. Both my parents are from Belfast. My father was from Logan Street in the Lower Falls. My mother from the Short Strand. They did not know each other in Ireland. They met in New York in the early 30s. And my mother came 1929, arriving, as I always say, with perfect Irish timing on the day the stock market crashed in 1929. in October, and then met him. And the family story is probably true. She saw him first at some Irish party at Prospect Hall in Brooklyn, and then saw him again at Webster Hall on 12th Street at a dance, and he was sitting alone against the wall while all his friends were trying in vain to get women to fall in love with them. And she went over and said, "Let's dance." And he said, "Ugh, I can't dance." And she said, "Neither can I." Took him out into the rest of his life. And then, you know, they had 7 children. I'm the first American. And they worked until they couldn't work, basically for the rest of their lives. And had a bunch of kids that did okay in America. I had started out to want to be a comic book artist. My favorite was Terry and the Pirates by Milton Caniff, and a bunch. I still have a collection of originals down at the house by different cartoonists that I liked. But then I began to think about being a painter. And because I had the GI Bill, I went off to Mexico for a year, 1956 and 57. And while I was there, I was kind of intimidated by the great mural paintings of Diego Rivera and Orozco, and the first Tamayos that I saw were there. And I, at the same time, began with a couple of teachers understanding I did have some talent for writing. And so it began shifting there. I wrote my first short stories and things like that. But because I had dropped out of high school, it was not, when I came back, I tried to get into Columbia, and they sort of said, you know, "Have you thought about dental technicians?" You know, I said, "No, I haven't. Fuck you." But I had amazing luck. I mean, people, it's a long, complicated story step by step, but I was able to make a transition into writing, which is one of the frustrations with painting, is I couldn't get the narrative sequence that I could get writing a comic book. This happens, and as a result, this happens, you know, that sense. I couldn't do that. I didn't have the talent to do that as a painter. I wrote 3 books in the early 70s about Briscoe, but they were straight thrillers. So I wanted to use him. If Sam Briscoe hadn't found his way into melodrama, what would his life have been really like? And so I decided to use him as the main character in Tabloid City, because he was the right age, someone who would remember what it was when there were 7 papers in town, not 3. And, nobody ever heard of the internet or imagined it even. And he's not me. I mean, there's some aspects of him, of course. He's more based on another friend of mine who was my first editor at the Post, named Paul Sand, who's dead, but very much fills part of the character of Sam Briscoe. Sand was from the Bronx. He also never went to university. Like a lot of guys in those days, it was a craft that had an apprentice system. Somebody with talent could go in and in the hands of journeymen, be able to learn the craft. It's like being Leonardo in Verrocchio's studio, and Verrocchio say, no, here's how you do an eyelash, you know, and explaining to young Leonardo how to do it. And that's how you learned. So when I got the chance to work at the Post in 1960, Sand, I think out of a sense of pity for me, you know, came in and decided to make a project at it and see if this dumb Mick could learn how to do this thing. And I was lucky to have him leading me into what I call the graduate school from which you never graduate, and had a great life because of it. 12:02 a.m. Sam Briscoe, the city room of the New York World, 100 West Street. Here comes Briscoe, 71 years old, 5'11", 182 pounds. He turns a corner into the city room of the last afternoon paper in New York. He is the editor-in-chief. His overcoat is arched across his left shoulder, and he's carrying his jacket. The cuffs of his shirt sleeves are crisply folded twice below the elbows. His necktie hangs loose without a knot, making two vertical dark red slashes inside the vertical bands of his bright red suspenders. He moves swiftly from long habit, as if eluding ambush by reporters and editors who might approach him for raises, days off, or loans. On these days, for news about buyouts and layoffs. His crew cut is steel gray, his lean furrowed face tightly shaven. The dark pouches under both eyes show that he has worked for many years at night. In the vast, almost empty room, there are 26 desks, 4 reporters, and 3 copy editors, all occasionally glancing at 4 mounted television screens tuned to New York One and CNN, Fox and MSNBC. A 5th screen is dark. Briscoe doesn't look at any of them. He goes directly to a man named Matt Logan, seated at the news desk in the center of the long, wide room. Other desks butt against each other, forming a kind of stockade. All are empty. "We got the wood yet?" Briscoe says. Some of the things I was interested in before I stopped drinking, I'm still interested in. But first of all, just in a simple way, when I stopped drinking, I had more time. The time spent drinking and the time spent recuperating from it. You know, any time I was tempted in that first year to have a drink, I thought about hangovers. And I said, I don't have to do that anymore. So I had more time, which meant I could read more, which meant that I could take more time with the stuff I was writing, including the journalism. So, and also I could be more perceptive. I could look and say, what is this? What am I missing here? What's this smell like? What, you know, use all the senses and description. What's the texture of that wall? What's the sounds in this building? Are they playing mambo music on the top floor or ukuleles? You know. So it made me more aware, and it made me feel more confident that I could do the things I wanted to do with my 2 daughters, because I had custody of them. So the last thing I wanted to be in front of those 2 girls was a schmuck. You know, I didn't want to come home half wrecked and, you know, and have them see that. So there were a combination of reasons. But I think it certainly made me more prolific. I've published, 21 books or something. And it made me see better. Not just look, but see. I think the news will always be part of our lives in this country. I do think that over the next 15 to 20 years, there's going to be a radical shift, so that the future of journalism and the future of newspapers are 2 separate discussions. One of the things, being in contact with so many young, ambitious kids at NYU, is it gave me a sense of optimism that they want to do it. They don't want to have a job just to make a lot of money. They want to lead meaningful lives. They want to have lives in which they can keep learning as they go along, and maybe help some people to get up when they get knocked down. I mean, they don't think of themselves as social workers or people engaged in an abstraction. They want to learn how to do it. So that made me feel that no matter what the means of delivery of the news, there's going to be talent in the room and passion among those with the talent. What I tell them about the computer and other things is that the piano didn't write the music. Mozart did. It doesn't matter whether you're using a computer or a feather. That it's who sits down in front of it and picks up either the feather or a mouse and starts to work. That's what matters. That training this is the most essential thing. And that means trying to be as fully conscious as possible about the world you're living in and about who preceded you to this world. The world didn't begin when you were born. And I think they get that, these young people. And so in that sense, I'm optimistic about what could be coming.